Well, shalom and good evening. This is Rabbi Leman, and this is Holy Language Biblical Hebrew class. We're going to be talking tonight about Isaiah chapter 1, verses 4 through 6. Last week, I mentioned that people might want to do verses 4 through 9, and I said that might be a bit much for us to talk about in one class, and I think it will be. We'll probably only get through verse 6 tonight. And Isaiah, as I said last week, is a book that I care very much about. I studied Isaiah for 3 years and read a lot of commentaries and started writing my own notes and commentaries on the book of Isaiah. And so a lot of the translation and the comments that come here are from that work that I did previously. And I'm glad that we're doing it as a part of our Holy Language class. We're just going to cover Isaiah chapters 1 and 2, probably take us about 12 weeks to get through that. This is the second class in Isaiah tonight. And we always begin class with a prayer. And there's a traditional prayer before Torah study. And of course, we're not studying Torah literally. We're studying the larger Torah, though. We're studying the prophets who continued the message of Torah. So even the prophets and the writings and the other parts of the Bible are, in a way, also Torah. And I'm also going to pray a few words of a modern Jewish prayer before studying the Torah. It's a little long, so I'm not going to read the whole thing. But this is by the leader of Renewal Judaism, Rabbi Dr. Zalman Schachter Shalomi, and it's a beautiful, beautiful prayer. I may use parts of it on different weeks in our prayer before our study time. But let me begin with the traditional prayer. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Asher kirashanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us by his commandments and commanded us to busy ourselves with the words of Torah. And in the prayer of Dr. Zalman Schachter Shalomi, my Lord, creator of all, master of all worlds, supreme, compassionate, and forgiving, thank you for your Torah. Thank you for allowing me to learn from it and to move towards serving you. Thank you for revealing some of the mysteries of your way. I'm amazed that this is truly happening to me. Please forgive me my foolishness and unkindness, the sins of my past. Sincerely, I pledge to live more uprightly, that I may be ever closer to you. Fill me with that awe of you that opens my capacity for loving, and open my heart to the mysteries of your holy way. Reveal your Torah, I pray. And I pray tonight as we look in Isaiah chapter 1 that we would indeed learn lessons from it that would help us with whatever issues we need to grow in. So I'm going to begin by reading the text of Isaiah 1, verses 4 through 6. And we have, and I'll try to read slowly. Sometimes I forget to go slow. Hoi goi chote am keved avon. Zera mereim banim mashchitim. Azvu et Adonai, ni'atzu et kadosh Yisrael. Nazoru achor. Verse 5. Almei tuku od. Tosifu sarah. Kol rosh lacholi. V'cholevav davai. Verse 6. Mikaf regel va'ad rosh. Ein bo matom. Petza v'chabura umaka triya. Lo zoru v'lo chubashu v'lo ruchaka ba'shamein. And I'm going to check just to see if there are any questions in the chat. Okay, so people are asking for the name of the rabbi of the modern prayer. Apparently there's a thing online called the Open Siddur Project, and I just found out about it, but it's Rabbi Zalman. I'm typing this in the comments for people who are watching the class live. Rabbi Zalman Schachter, his name is so hard to spell, Shalomi. And you can find this prayer on the Open Siddur Project. It's his prayer before Torah study. I think it's just a fantastic prayer. Okay, so let me go back over verse 4, and I'll go even a little more slowly this time. Hoi, by the way, hoi is just such a neat word. Hoi, you might think, what in the world does hoi mean? Is that really a Hebrew word? Well, it's kind of an exclamation, and it actually means woe. So when people say, woe is me, they're saying hoi. And as you know, there's another way to say that, which is just oi. Sometimes in the Hebrew text it says oi, and you've heard, of course, people say oy vey. And sometimes it says hoi, and that's what we have here. Hoi means woe. So there's a little bit, notice a little bit of kind of rhyming or alliteration to these words. Hoi goy chote kevid avon. Zera mereim banim mashchitim. Azvu et Adonai ni'atzu et kadosh Yisrael. Nazoru achor. So as we begin this passage, and before we begin translating and working our way through it slowly, I want to talk about the meaning overall of the passage we're going to be reading tonight. And this is kind of the essence of Isaiah 1, 4 through 9. We're going to be spending 2 weeks on Isaiah 1, 4 through 9. And that would be the woeful catastrophe that happened in Isaiah's time, in which all the Judean cities were destroyed except Jerusalem, echoes in later generations, for which the sermons of Isaiah are repreached. The people after the exile also see their land in this way, with Jerusalem standing alone, the last remnant of the cities of Judah. Let me explain what I mean by that. I explained last time that Isaiah chapter 1 is an introduction to the entire scroll of Isaiah. And I explained that in my opinion, I definitely recognize that some viewers of these videos won't agree with my opinion, but in my opinion, Isaiah is a book that primarily came together in 3 parts. First Isaiah, second Isaiah, and third Isaiah. Written in 3 different time periods. In the lifetime of Isaiah of Jerusalem in the 8th century, first Isaiah, second Isaiah during the exile, third Isaiah after the exile. In chapter 1, I said, is an introduction to the whole book that takes excerpts from the rest of the scroll and puts them together like a string of pearls or like a montage to introduce the message of the rest of the book. And so the final scroll of Isaiah, the final complete scroll of Isaiah, what we think of as the book of Isaiah in our Bible, didn't come together and wasn't completely finished and edited until after the exile. And what do you have after the exile when the people came back from Babylon? Well, there aren't any cities in Judah except for Jerusalem. Judah had been laid waste and, wasn't a thriving place. So Jerusalem is really the only city that's going after the exile. Well, in Isaiah 1, 4 through 9, we're in a situation where all the cities of Judah have been destroyed except for Jerusalem. We're especially going to cover that next week when we translate verses 7 through 9. And I'll explain how we know that this is the case. So these words of Isaiah describing what things looked like when Jerusalem was the only city standing, that's very similar to how the people felt after the exile. You see, the words of Isaiah were very appropriate to them because they too had been through a destruction and Jerusalem was all that was left. So now let me read that again. The woeful catastrophe that happened in Isaiah's time, with all the Judean cities destroyed except for Jerusalem, echoes in later generations, for which the sermons of Isaiah are repreached. What I mean by repreached is now you can take those old words that Isaiah wrote 200 years before or 250 years before, you can say them again, and they're just as meaningful for the people after the exile. The people after exile also see their land in this way, with Jerusalem standing alone, the last remnant of the cities of Judah. Isaiah's words are a call to recognition for every generation of God's people groaning for messianic redemption, to assess our self-inflicted wounds and to change. Those who are supposed to be a goy kadosh, a holy nation, and you'll see later in Isaiah chapter 4, verse 3, he refers to Israel or to Judah as a goy kadosh, a holy nation. That's what Israel is called to be. Remember in Exodus 19, you are holy. He said you are a holy people. They're called to be a goy kadosh, but instead they have become a goy chote, a sinful nation. They have spurned the call from Hashem for Jerusalem to be great. And other parts of Isaiah's message to his generation will clarify what it is that they have spurned. Therefore, they are not experiencing divine protection, and they find themselves hurting and with no one to treat their injuries. And that's especially the part we're going to translate tonight. We're going to be translating verses that are about, hey, why can't you look at yourself and see that things aren't right with you? You're experiencing the curse. You're not experiencing the blessing. Why can't you see that and turn to God? Jerusalem stands lonely and fragile, like a common tower in a flat field or a booth of sticks rising up in the middle of a vineyard. Next week, we'll be translating verses that talk more about that image. Jerusalem has almost shared the fate of Sodom. That's going to be in verse 10, which we'll get to in a couple more weeks. But the fact that God has left survivors is a clue to his purpose for them, an enduring purpose which the final editors of the book of Isaiah know will inspire readers whose faith is in Hashem. Jerusalem, after the exile, has hit bottom. Sometimes we have to hit bottom to see ourselves as we really are. Always, we have to believe that God will show mercy in order to be healed. And I very much believe that. I believe sometimes we have to get pretty beat up, and we have to hit bottom before we take stock of where we are. And that's a lot of Isaiah's message to us tonight. So let's begin with hoi goi chote. Hoi means woe. It's pretty easy to look up in your holiday dictionary. Any of you who are kind of new to the classes that I teach, I recommend this dictionary, Holiday, Holladay, a concise Hebrew and Aramaic lexicon of the Old Testament. It's available on Amazon for about $25 or $26. It's really the easiest to use and the best Hebrew dictionary there is. Hoi, woe, goi, nation, chote. All right, let's talk about chote. What kind of word is chote? You can tell that chote is a participle. And one of the ways you can tell it's a participle is that the first vowel, the vowel that goes on the first letter of the root, is an O class vowel. And that's one of the markers of a participle. And the vowel that's on the second letter of the root is a tsere, so an E class vowel. And that's usually the sound you have in a participle, O-A. Okay, so those are the two vowel sounds, O and A. Chote. Those are markers of a participle. Now, the root is very easy to figure out because all three letters of the root are here. Literally, all you have to do is look up chet, tet, aleph. And when you look up chet, tet, aleph, look through the definition in Holiday Dictionary, and you'll see this form, chote, listed as a PTC, which is the abbreviation for participle. Now, participles in Hebrew can be three things. A participle in Hebrew can be a verb, it can be an adjective, or it can serve as a noun. In this case, it's serving as an adjective. And the way we can tell it's serving as an adjective is it comes right after a noun. And it's modifying the noun that comes before it. So this is the goi chote, the sinful nation. All right? Then am keved avon. Okay, am is people. Keved is it means it comes from the root kavod. You're probably familiar with kavod, which is a word that can mean heavy or glory, heaviness or glory, weight or glory. And I just thought about that. That's the title of a C.S. Lewis essay, The Weight of Glory. Because in ancient languages, there was this idea that a person who had glory or honor, someone who was respected or a muckety-muck, there was a certain weight. Sometimes a word we use in English is gravitas. We say that a person who has a lot of honor or glory, they have a certain gravitas about them, which means they have a certain weightiness to their presence. And so these words are related. So keved is an unusual form related to kavod. Well, you can look it up in Holiday and see that it's an adjective that means heavy, or I'm going to translate it laden, because I think that sounds more poetic. So am keved avon. All right, am is people, and what are those people? This is a laden people. This is a heavy people. And then we just have this word avon. So if we translate it literally, it's a heavy people of avon. Well, that's kind of strange. Why is this adjective, this noun, avon, follow heavy people? The relationship, even though technically it would be a heavy people of guilt, probably the meaning is a heavy people with guilt, or a people heavy with guilt. And the way I want to translate it is a people laden with guilt. Woe, sinful nation, a people laden with guilt. I'm going to check and see if we have any questions. Okay. So now we come to the next part. Zera mereim. Zera is pretty easy. It's a word, it's a noun for seed or descendants or offspring. I'm going to choose the word offspring here. Although I'll tell you in a minute kind of another translation that's funny for this, but Zera mereim. So we've got offspring followed by this word mereim. What can we tell about mereim by looking at it? Well, we can tell that it's plural. So this is either a plural noun or a plural adjective. And let's hold off our judgment on it for just a minute. Let's go back and look at Zerah. Is Zerah singular or plural? The answer is yes. It's just like the word seed in English. If I say I spread seed on the field, that's a plural. It's what we call a collective. And we don't have to put the actual plural on it. So Zerah is all by itself potentially plural. So now let's look back at mereim. Okay. Another thing I can tell about mereim is that it's probably a different kind of participle. Now, I know this is confusing because I was just telling you that participles have an O and then an A vowel. Well, that's for a call or a pa'al participle. But for PL and hifiel participles, which aren't as common, but they're common enough you might as well learn about them, participles have a mem prefixed to the word. And so this mem is telling me that this is a participle. And so I'm going to ignore the mem when I'm trying to figure out what the root of this word is. And I know for sure that the resh and the ayin are part of the root. And so I'm going to look under resh ayin, and I got to think, what could the missing letter be? Now this is where it gets a little tough. The missing letter could be a hey, or this could be a situation where the second root letter and the third root letter are the same. And we call that a geminate. And that's exactly what this is going to be. This is going to be a geminate. In the case of a geminate, this letter is ayin in this case, and the missing letter is also going to be ayin. And in a geminate verb, frequently the third root letter drops out, and you just end up with the resh and the ayin. If you look this up in Holiday, you might guess ra'ah at first, and of course ra'ah is a verb for seeing. But when you look under ra'ah, I hope I'm right about this, I didn't actually try to do this, and we look in the hifiel under participles for ra'ah, okay, it's, yes, that is not what the participle is going to look like, I'm pretty sure. It doesn't have any, the participle for ra'ah is going to be mar'eh. It's got a different spelling. So you know this isn't what we're looking for. Oh, what am I thinking? That's ra'ah with an aleph. I'm sorry. We're talking about an ayin. Everything I just said was wrong. Let me flip back over to resh ayin. If we look under resh ayin, we might have guessed that it was a hey. And that would be the verb for grazing. And there is no hifiel or PL for that root, so we know it's not that. And I keep looking down, then I see there's a noun, ra'ah. There's the word re'ah, which means friend or fellow. Yeah, it's, you know, if you guess resh ayin hey is the root, you won't find it. But if you keep looking on page 343 in Holiday, you'll see resh ayin ayin. And under resh ayin ayin, there is a hifiel, and it does list the participle, mereim, just exactly like we have here, page 343 in Holiday. Sometimes being a verb detective is very difficult. You got to try a little trial and error. This case that I'm teaching about right now, geminate verbs, they're a little bit difficult. You might want to write that down, Geminate. If you have a Hebrew grammar book, look up geminate verbs, find out a little bit more about how they are. And the other thing that makes this difficult is this is a hifil. A lot of people who are fairly new at Hebrew understand how the main kind of verb works, the kal or the pa'al, but they haven't looked very much at hifil, pl, hitpa'el, nifal, pu'al, and hofal, the other kinds of verbs. So, zera mereim. Mereim is being used here as an adjective. So the way I translate it is, zera is offspring, and it could just be wicked offspring. I wanted to sound a little more poetic in my translation, so I said, offspring who are wicked. So I've come up with, woe, sinful nation, a people laden with guilt, offspring who are wicked. I said I would tell you another translation that's kind of funny, and that other translation is seed of evildoers. Sometimes people will render this as seed of evildoers. And I don't know, to me that sounds kind of funny. I like something more poetic. Offspring who are wicked. And then we have banim mashchitim. And I promise after we get through this technical translation of verse 4, we'll talk a bit about meaning. Banim mashchitim. Okay, so let's look at banim. It's the plural of bain. And bain means son. Banim means sons. However, you shouldn't translate it sons all the time. In any context where it probably is talking about males and females, you should translate it children. And that's how Hebrew works. It's a patriarchal language, so if it's talking about both males and females, it will just use the masculine term. But the meaning isn't really masculine. The meaning is the children of Israel, the children of Judah. And it's not just talking about the male children. So you should translate it children mashchitim. Okay, mashchitim has a lot of similarity to moreim, the word we just looked at. It starts with a mem, which is a sign of a hifil or a pl participle. And then we can see that there are 3 root letters. So you know that the shin is part of the root, the chet is part of the root. You know that that yod is not part of the root. Why is that yod there? Well, that's one of the things that happens in a hifil. Between the second and third letter of the root, there's an infixed yod. So hifils usually will have a yod in the position between the second and third root letter. So the root is shachat. And you'll find shachat in holiday, and you'll see that it has to do with destroying. But this is hifil, so if you look at the hifil meaning of it, it's about causing to destroy or acting in a way that causes destruction. So these are children, plural, and this is the adjective. The adjective has to be plural to match the subject. And these are children who are destructive. And the way I decided to render that, again, to be a little bit more poetic, is children who act destructively. So we've got, woe, sinful nation, a people laden with guilt, offspring who are wicked, children who act destructively. Isaiah is not saying very nice things about his people. But I want you to notice something else. We've gone from nation to people to offspring to children. What's happening is the designations for people narrow from general to relational, emphasizing poetically that this nation is made up of God's people. There's a sort of a poetic sense to this. It narrows all the way down to children. Nation, people, offspring, children. Isaiah is a very poetic book. There's a lot of neat poetry and things that Isaiah did. Azavu et Adonai. Azavu comes from the root azav, which means abandon. And azavu is the third person plural form. So this means they abandoned, past tense. They abandoned et. Et is the direct object marker. It's untranslatable. Adonai. So that's the object of the verb. Who did they abandon? They abandoned Adonai. So I translated that, they have abandoned Hashem. Ni'atzu et kadosh Yisrael. Ni'atzu. You can see that ni'atzu is a lot like azavu, except it has a different first vowel. And that's because azavu is the common kind of verb, which we call the call, Q-A-L, or the pa'al. And ni'atsu is the P-L, which isn't terribly different from a call, but it does have a different initial vowel. So that's why it's not na'atsu. It's ni'atsu because it's a P-L. And you see one of the signs of P-L is that the vowel under the first letter will be a chirek, and it will make the E sound. But ni'atsu is also third person plural, and it's easy to look up because the root is nun, aleph, tzadeh, and it means spurn, to reject or to spurn. I like the translation spurn. So they have spurned. Who have they spurned? Et, direct object marker, we don't translate it. Kadosh Yisrael. All right, look at Kadosh. You see the vowel under the kuf is a shva, the two dots. Why is it a kuf and not a kametz? Why doesn't it say kadosh? Because this is a word pair, and kadosh is in construct. And what that means is there's an of relationship between the two words. When you have two nouns back to back, and especially if you can see that the first one, the vowels are a little bit weakened, you have a construct relationship or a word pair. And it means the something of something. So instead of saying kadosh, we say kadosh. It got weakened because it's in construct. Yisrael is in absolute form. Nothing changes about it. What does it mean? Well, kadosh means holy, but you can also use, kadosh is actually an adjective. And sometimes in Hebrew, adjectives are nouns. Sometimes adjectives function as nouns. And it doesn't make sense to say the holy adjective of Israel. We understand that this adjective is being used in a noun position. It's functioning as a noun because it's in construct with the word after it. And therefore, we would translate it the Holy One of Israel. And by the way, calling God the Holy One is something that is common to Isaiah. 25 times through the book of Isaiah, he says, Kadosh Israel. And you may be familiar with the fact that the rabbis often refer to God as the Holy One. That the Holy One, blessed be He, occurs over and over again in rabbinic literature. Where did the rabbis get it from? They got it from Isaiah. A great way to refer to God as the Holy One. Oh, I see I had a question that I missed. Avon is pronounced avon. Yes, a lot of people could have trouble pronouncing this word avon because when you see a vav with a dot over it, often you think it is an O sound. But you can tell that vav is being used as a consonant here because there's already a vowel under the ayin in the word avon, and there's no vowel over the second letter, so that cholam has to be for the consonant vav. There's really nothing else you can pronounce it as. In Hebrew, we never have two vowels in a row without a consonant, so there's no way it could be aon if you were thinking that that was a possibility. Since there has to be a vowel for every letter except the last letter of the word. Therefore, we know that the vav is being used as a consonant there. Good question. Hope I didn't miss any other questions. Yeah, okay, looks like I got them. All right. Azavu et Adonai, ni'atsu et Kadosh Yisrael, nazoru achor. Now, nazoru is going to be difficult. Nazoru is going to be a nifal, and the root is going to be Zion. I think it's going to be Zion resh resh. Let me make sure that's right. No, it's going to be Zion vav resh. The root of nazoru is Zion vav resh. And being a verb detective can be difficult sometimes. Probably the first thing I did when I saw this is I was tempted to look up nun Zion resh to see if that was the root of the verb. But one way you can tell that it's not are the vowels. Because usually in a perfect, you would have ah, ah. But this isn't ah, ah. It's na-zo. It's ah-o. So that throws me off a little bit. But still, I might, when I was trying to figure out what this verb was, I might start by looking at nun Zion resh, and I would figure out that that was a dead end. Then the next thing that would occur to me is that noon might not be a part of the verb root itself. That the noon might be because this is a nephal. And nephal verbs put a noon in front of the root. All right? So in other words, a noon got prefixed in front of this verb. But now looking at it, I can see, well, there are only two root letters here, Zayin and Resh. So I'll take this one out of the equation. So now we don't know what the third root letter is. And since we don't know what well, actually, we're not sure which root letter is missing. See, it could be the first letter that's missing, could be the middle letter that's missing, or it could be the third letter. So I guessed wrong when I looked at it a second ago. I guessed, okay, maybe this is Zayin Resh Resh. Well, I would look up Zayin Resh Resh, and I wouldn't find a nephal that looks like this. So I would have to guess again. And then I would say, okay, maybe it's not the last letter that's missing. Maybe it's one of the other letters. Anyway, you have to go through a process of eliminating all the things it could be. So to be a good verb detective, you have to learn all the kind of situations, which is why I'm always explaining to you every verb we come to why the letter is missing. Well, whenever you have a middle letter missing from a verb, here's why. The middle letter is either a vav or a yod. So and we call these hollow verbs. Any verb that has a vav or a yod in the middle, that's going to tend to disappear in many of its forms. So after trial and error, hopefully you get to the point where you realize, okay, let's see if this is a Zayin, Vav, Resh. And finally you'll get to the meaning of it. And it has to do with separating. And then achor means back. So literally it's like they separated themselves back, because nephal has a reflexive or a passive sense. They separated themselves, and they separated themselves back. That doesn't translate very well, so I would render it, they have backed away. Now, nazoru was very difficult. It wasn't even easy for me. I didn't even remember what the root was when I looked at it. What can you do to get a little bit of help when you run into a word that's very hard to figure out what the root is? Well, there are a couple of tools. One of them is qbible.com. Just Q, the letter Q, Bible.com. And if you can pull up on qbible.com their Hebrew, they have a Hebrew that has the Strong's numbers and everything. And it tells you what the root of every verb is. It's a good tool. If you have a Bible, if you have a computer Bible program that does original languages, it will tell you the root of words. Because sometimes we just need a hand. It's not always easy to figure out the roots. And this one is a pretty tough one. All right, so my whole translation of verse 1 then is, woe, sinful nation, a people laden with guilt, offspring who are wicked, children who act destructively. They have abandoned Hashem. They have spurned the Holy One of Israel. They have backed away. Just a few comments now about this. The whole of Isaiah chapter 1 is a collection of excerpts from Isaiah's prophecies strung together as an introduction to the final book of Isaiah. And verses 4 through 9 are like a string of Isaianic pearls that have been put together. And verse 4 and verses 5 through 9, scholars theorize, have been imported from different locations from the earlier form of the book of Isaiah. And we're not going to go over this, but one scholar, Hugh Williamson, has written articles saying we can tell where these things are missing from other parts of Isaiah. So it's literally, if the prophecies of Isaiah were put together, someone plucked out excerpts and put them in the beginning. And we can actually tell, if you really look for it, if you hunt for it, you could say, oh, here's where verse 4 probably originally was in the book of Isaiah. And the same thing with verses 5 through 9. He believes he found the place that verses 5 through 9 were originally, and where they fit in very well if we put them back in that place. This is because the editor wanted to introduce the book using Isaiah's own words. So he excerpted them out, and he didn't leave them in both places. He took them out of one place, put them at the beginning. And the meaning of Isaiah 1, 4 through 9 altogether is a strong plea for the people to see the truth of their condition. And verse 4 has already gotten off to a big start with that. By the way, verse 5 and verse 6 are going to be far easier to translate than verse 4 was. Now, the genuine words of Isaiah to his generation in the year 750 to 700 are being repreached to the people of Judah after the catastrophe of 586 and after they returned from Babylon, and after there have been rebuilding efforts in the city of Jerusalem. So we're probably talking about later than 516, or sometime between 539 when they return and 516 when the temple was rebuilt. And Isaiah 1:4-9 is going to, we'll see this next week, refer to a specific historical tragedy which we know about the Bible from other sources. The destruction of 46 cities in Judah in 701 BCE by Sennacherib of Assyria. And Jerusalem was the only city left standing. We see this described in 2 Kings and also in 2 Chronicles and also later in Isaiah chapter 38 and 39. So this destruction that Sennacherib unleashed on the kingdom of Judah is described in other parts of the Bible. This event was at the end of the career of Isaiah. Wait a minute. Right here in the beginning of Isaiah chapter 1, we're reading about events that happened at the end of his career? You mean the book of Isaiah isn't in chronological order? That's right. It's one of the things to understand when you read the book of Isaiah. The land and the people are thoroughly injured and unwell, according to verses 5-6, which we're about to translate, because their condition is exactly as described in verses 7-9, which we'll do in the next class. So here in verse 4, there's a fourfold indictment. That's what we just translated. They're supposed to be a goy kadosh, but they're a goy chote. We talked about that. They should be a people of blessing, but they are weighed down with blameworthiness. This is guilt, avon. We translated that word avon. This is guilt not in the sense of shame, feeling guilty, but it's guilt as in you are guilty of the crime. You would be judged guilty. They should be the offspring of Abraham, but they're the offspring of evildoers. And we find later in Isaiah 29:22, that Judah is called the offspring of Abraham. That's what they're supposed to be the Zerah Avraham. There are synagogues named Zerah Avraham. It's a good name. They're supposed to be the Zerah Avraham, but instead they're the Zerah Mereim, the seed of evildoers, the offspring of evildoers. They should attach themselves with devotion to the Holy One of Israel, but instead, what have they done to the Holy One of Israel? They have despised and spurned him. This is why the people went into exile. And Isaiah foretold it before it happened. Okay, let's look at verse 5, and I'll check, see if we have any questions. No questions. Okay, fortunately, verse 5 and verse 6 are going to be a little easier than verse 4 was. I know that was tough Hebrew. Okay, al may. Al may. Our first two words kind of go together. And what I did is I looked up, I already knew that all means on or over, or sometimes it means concerning. But may, I didn't know what may was. It's not ma. Ma would be what. So, what does may mean? It's not ma, it's not what. So I looked up may, and then I thought, I bet in the definition of may, somewhere in the definition, holiday is going to tell me what it means if you have all may together. And sure enough, that's exactly what happens on holiday, page 184. At the very end of the definition of may, the last thing he tells you is what all may means. And it means why. On what basis or why. I wanted to render that a little bit more poetically, so I said, to what end? You'll understand why in just a minute. To what end tuku ode? I said that this verse was going to be easier, but tuku is not easy. It's going to get easier after this, I promise. Tuku is one of the hardest verb roots to translate because, all right, let's just take a look at it. What can we tell about tuku by looking at it? We can tell that it is a passive. And the way we can tell it's a passive is because the first root letter has that U class vowel, the oo vowel. And that's a sign of a passive. And then we can tell that it's second person. That means it's you. The way we can tell that is because the first letter is a tav. And on an imperfect, A tav marks the second person form. So in other words, it's you something, and it's going to be passive. It's going to be some kind of passive form. But what in the world is the root? All right, we know that the tav is not a part of the root. That's the imperfect prefix. And we know that the u, the shurek there at the end, that's not a part of the root because it's the suffix that goes with the second person plural form. So the only root letter that's left is the kaf. Well, fortunately, I've seen this word enough times that I didn't even have to look it up. I know that there's one Hebrew root verb that the first letter and the third letter disappear. Well, I better change fingers, huh? The first letter and the third letter disappear. And that would be nakah, nun, kaf, he. This is a good verb to memorize. It's somewhat common. And you frequently see it happen that the nun disappears and the kaf disappears, and the he disappears, and you're left with only the kaf. So this is nakah. Now what we need to do is we need to look in the Holiday Dictionary under nakah and try to figure out what the strange form is. And it'll be listed under the hofal. So it's going to take some digging. You need to look all through there until you find tuku. And you'll find tuku under the hofal. And it will tell you a passive meaning. Are beaten. You are beaten. So to what end are you beaten? Ode. Still. Ode means more or still or again. Something that gets repeated. To what end are you still being beaten? What a potent question. It's almost like asking a woman who's being abused by her husband or her lover, why are you still being beaten? Why are you letting this happen to you? To what end are you being beaten still? All right, what about Tosifu Sarah? This is not Sarah like Abraham's wife. This is Sarah with a samet. Let's talk about Sarah first. You can look it up easily. It's a noun that means rebellion. All right? Then look at what we're left with in this verb. We have a verb that starts with tav, and if it's an imperfect, that's going to be the marker of second person. And it ends with u, just like tuku did. So this is a second person verb. It's saying you will do something, right? Now, what on earth could the root be? Well, we see that the second letter there is a vav that has a cholam over it. It's a cholam vav. That actually is a part of the root. The way I can tell it's a part of the root, it's not a part of the prefix. You don't put a vav in the prefix in any of the imperfect forms. So it must be a root letter. But there aren't any verbs that actually start with vav. So why is there vav as the first root letter of this verb? Because, and it's something I mention fairly often, yod and vav are interchangeable. So sometimes in a form of a verb, a yod will turn into a vav. And if you can't figure something out, consider whether a vav may have changed into a yod. Heys tend to change into yods, and vavs tend to change into yods, and vice versa. So the first root letter is really a yod. And then the second root letter is a samek. We know that the next yod is not a part of the root. We know that in a hifil verb, yod gets inserted between the second and third letter. And so the next root letter is going to be the pei. So yod, samek, pei. Yasaf, or in this case, Yosef. And that is the hifil form of yod, samek, pei, which means to multiply or to cause something to increase. To increase or to multiply. To cause to increase. To multiply something. So, to what end are you being beaten still? Multiplying rebellion. It's literally you are multiplying rebellion, but since we've already said you in the previous phrase, we don't have to put it here. To what end are you being beaten still? Multiplying rebellion. All right, kol rosh lacholi. Now you might think, why are you pronouncing that kol? It should be kal. Anytime you see this word, it's always pronounced with an O sound. And you'll notice there's no, most people don't pay any attention to the accents in the Hebrew Bible that the scribes put in there. But if you do pay attention to it, you'll see there's no accent on this word. And an obscure pronunciation rule in Hebrew is that if you have comates in an unaccented closed syllable, it's pronounced O. That's really complicated. If you'd rather just remember it, kol is always pronounced kol, whether it has a cholim or comates. Anytime you see it, just pronounce it kol. Kol rosh. The accent is on the rosh. So kol rosh lacholi. And why did I say lacholi? Why not lachali? Because when you put a shva next to a comates, it's pronounced O. And so this is whole head for sickness. It sounds a lot better if you just say the whole head is sick, or the whole head has become sick. The whole head is for sickness is kind of what it is literally. And then v'chol levav davai. Now there we have and, chol, all, or the whole, levav, heart. And the whole heart is davai. Davai you can look up and it means sick. The whole head has become sick, and the whole heart is sick. It's a little bit repetitive in my translation. I wonder if I actually found a different word. Oh, unwell. The whole heart is unwell. I like that better. Then we have a little variation. The whole heart is unwell. The whole head has become sick, and the whole heart is unwell. To what end are you being beaten still, multiplying rebellion? The whole head has become sick, and the whole heart is unwell. So we just have one other verse to translate tonight, and then I'm going to bring it all together and talk about the meaning of the passage, and we'll look forward to the next class. All right. Mikaf regel va'ad rosh. Okay, mi kaf. Mi is from, kaf is sole, regel is foot. Well, kaf could be the palm or the sole. But since it's of the regel, the foot, it's the sole. From the sole of the foot, or from a sole of a foot, however, even though he doesn't use even though Isaiah didn't put the definite article on regel, it doesn't make a lot of sense in English to translate it without it. It doesn't sound good if you say, from a sole of a foot. Isn't going to fit very well in the sentence, so I translate it from the sole of the foot. I think the idea is in poetry sometimes you could leave out the definite article to make it shorter. But it definitely sounds better with the definite article in there. From the sole of the foot, va'ad, and until, ad means until, which until can mean something in space or time. And here it means space. From the sole of the foot until the head. In other words, from the whole body, from the sole up to the head. From the sole of the foot to the head, ein bo matom. Ein bo matom. Ein is there is not. Bo is in it. You could translate it in him, but it's talking about the body, from the sole of the body to the head. There is not in it matom. Matom means a healthy spot. From the whole body, in the entire body, from the sole of the foot to the top of the head, there isn't a healthy spot. This is comparing Jerusalem to a body that's injured. And it's saying there isn't anything healthy in the whole body. And Isaiah continues on with this image of Jerusalem as a wounded person. Petzah, v'chabura, umaka, tzriya. We have three nouns and an adjective. The first noun, petzah, cut. The second noun, chabura, bruise. The third noun, makah, wound. And then the adjective tzriya. Why is the adjective tzriya, why does it have the ah on the end? Because the adjective has to match the noun that it modifies. And the noun, makah, is feminine, so the adjective tzriya has to be feminine. So what does it mean? And fresh wound. So there's not a healthy spot in it. Cut and bruise and fresh wound. Cut and bruise and fresh wound. This is like a boxer after a bad fight, or a soldier coming out after a battle. He's cut up all over his body. There isn't a place on him that doesn't have a cut, a bruise, or a wound. a fresh wound. Lo zoru. Zoru is another pretty hard one. I thought, because it came so close after that previous verb we looked at that was Zayin Vav Resh turned out to be the root. I thought this would have the same root, but it's not. It's not Zayin Vav Resh. So then I tried Zayin Resh Resh, a geminate. We talked about geminates earlier, where the second and the third root letter are the same. So Zayin Resh Resh, I looked at it, and it turns out that this is from Zayin Resh Resh, and it's a call perfect, and it means they are not pressed. It's a weird form of the perfect. It's called in some commentaries a passive of the perfect. They are not pressed. Velo hu bashu. You can see that hu bashu is a passive form because a U class vowel usually means a passive form of the verb in Hebrew. Velo hu bashu. So we look up the root chet, bet, shin, and we find this form hu bashu listed under the pu'al, and pu'al is a passive form of the verb. So what does it mean? It means not bound up, like bound up with bandages. So you got all these wounds all over your body, and they're not pressed, lo zoru, and they're not bound with bandages, velo chubashu. And then the last part of verse 6 follows that same logic, velo ruchaka bashameh, velo ruchaka bashameh, and not rukaka. You can see that the root of this is resh kaf kaf. It's another geminate, but in this case, all the letters stayed here. And resh kaf kaf means treated, like a doctor treats or a medic would treat a wound. Not treated ba with shamein, oil, meaning olive oil. What they would do in the ancient world is they would put olive oil in the wound to keep it soft, kind of like us putting Vaseline or something or lotion on a spot. So to help it heal faster, they would put olive oil on it. And a lot of people in the Middle East still use olive oil to heal problems on the skin. So here's my whole translation then of verses 4 through 6. I'll actually read it off of my notes. Woe, sinful nation, a people laden with guilt, offspring who are wicked, children who act destructively. They have abandoned Hashem. They have spurned the Holy One of Israel. They have backed away. To what end are you being beaten, multiplying rebellion? The whole head has become sick. The whole heart is unwell. From the sole of the foot to the head, there is not a healthy spot. Cut and bruise and fresh wound. They are not pressed or bound or treated with oil or treated with olive oil. I went on ahead and put the word olive in there to make it clear. So let's talk about verses 5 and 6. The first part of verse 5 is the only question in this passage. And the question is, to what end are you still being beaten? And it's a question calling for change. It's really not a mystery why the land of Judah is devastated and why the people as a whole are bleeding and barely surviving. Isaiah understood there to be a very clear reason for their condition. Things are bad, nearly a destruction like Sodom. Injuries are untreated, and Jerusalem alone is left. The onus is on the people for this near total catastrophe. Why do they choose this condition of oblivion when the power to change it is in their hands? Now, Israel had a relationship with God that isn't like any other nation. God promised to bless Jerusalem, to bless the Davidic king, to bless the people of Israel if they followed his ways. This isn't a promise that America has or any other country on the earth. If the people of Israel at this time had been living according to the ideals that God had passed down through Moses and in the covenant with King David, that God would have blessed them. It was really up to them. And Isaiah is saying, knowing this, knowing that if we as a nation would just follow God's way, we would be blessed, why can't we do it? Now, obviously, the answer to that is just knowing that following God's way has no power to make us follow God's way. Isaiah isn't going to explore that bit of theology. It's maybe something he wouldn't have been able to understand. You know, sometimes the righteous can't understand why everybody isn't righteous like they are. But even the righteous find that we can't perfectly obey. Well, I shouldn't include myself in the righteous. Even some other righteous people, and I don't include myself in the number, find that they can't. I've read the works of people who are deemed righteous by a lot of others, and they would say, you have no idea how wicked I am in my heart. And so, Isaiah may think, hey, look, all we have to do is follow God's way, and we'll be blessed. We won't be able to be overrun by other nations. Why can't we just do this? Well, we never live up to it, do we? Now, one question we might ask as we're going through this first part of the book of Isaiah is he going to refer to the Torah that God gave to Moses on Mount Sinai? Is that what he's talking about? Is he talking about the blessings and curses of the Torah? Is he saying if Jerusalem would follow God's ways given at Sinai in the Torah, then God would bless the nation and they wouldn't have to worry about countries like Assyria attacking them? The problem is, and this is one of the interesting things I found out when I read Isaiah closely for 3 years, is he doesn't really talk about Moses or Mount Sinai or the giving of the Torah. Isaiah's focus is totally different. He's constantly talking about the kings of the line of David and the promises to Jerusalem. He talks about the Zion Psalms and the promises to the Davidic kings. And in a way, the covenant given through Moses is already included in the Davidic covenant. But it's interesting that Isaiah doesn't think so much in terms of Moses and the Torah. He thinks in terms of David, Jerusalem, and the promises to David in Jerusalem. And the whole book of Isaiah is based on that idea. It's one of the surprising results of closely reading the book of Isaiah that I found. And then I found out this has been recognized by a lot of other scholars for quite a long time, that Isaiah's theology is very David-centered and Jerusalem-centered. So in my commentary, I refer to this. I say, we might ask on what basis Isaiah believes Judah has a choice in its condition. On what grounds he believed they had abandoned Hashem and could repent and return to blessing. Many assume that Deuteronomy lies in the background of this passage because there is a similarity with Deuteronomy in verse 2. Isaiah 1:2 sounds a lot like Deuteronomy 32, about the witness of the heavens and the earth. And there is a long-standing theory that one of the editing sessions that happened in the book of Isaiah was in the time of Josiah, when the Deuteronomy texts were being put together. But if you look through the whole of Isaiah 1 through 39, there's very little reference to anything connected with Sinai or Moses. It may be that as Isaiah is assuming without saying a covenant which Hashem has with Israel, but it's curious that he doesn't mention any of the details anywhere. Throughout 1st Isaiah, and in fact, this will also be the case in 2nd and 3rd Isaiah, the strong basis for Isaiah's prophecy to Judah is the Davidic covenant and the related beliefs about the capital that David chose, Jerusalem. And all of the Psalms about Zion and the Psalms about Jerusalem seem to be in the background for Isaiah. Therefore, if we interpret Isaiah 1 through 4 in a manner consistent with the things that Isaiah actually emphasizes, the basis for Israel's apostasy is a failure to live up to the Davidic promise. The kings of Judah are supposed to make Jerusalem a capital for Hashem, but the worship at the temple is insincere. When we translate Isaiah 1, 10 through 15, we'll find out that the worship at the temple is insincere. The society of Judah is unjust. We just read about that in verse 4. They're called offspring who are wicked. And later on, he's going to say a lot about how unjust Judah and Jerusalem are at this time. The king, furthermore, has relied on military alliances instead of listening to the prophet and listening to the voice of God. So the people, the city, and the king aren't living up to the Davidic covenant. So the question in 5a, to what end are you being beaten still, is why don't the people choose to become the Jerusalem of Davidic glory? That's what he's asking. After all, when the son of David forsakes the way of Hashem, what does it say in the Davidic covenant? I will chastise him with the rod of men and the affliction of mortals. And what's happened to Jerusalem right here in this passage? It's like God has been hitting them with a stick. He told David, if any of your descendants don't listen to me, they will be chastised with the rod of men and the affliction of mortals. Look how seriously Isaiah took that. He says the reason Jerusalem is like a man that's been beaten. Now we know beaten with what? Beaten with a rod. the rod that God said he would beat the kings of Israel with if they didn't listen, or the kings of Judah, I should say. Because the people have spurned this vision of greatness, they find themselves like wounded victims with no treatment or anyone to show them compassion. All right, I admit this wasn't the most inspiring of Isaiah passages. This is kind of like the bad news. Next week, we're still going to sort of be in the bad news, but I'm going to show you how this really became a message of hope for the people of Israel, for the people of Judah. Now, we're not going to be able to have class next week. Our next class will be on the 21st. I'm going to be at the Messianic Jewish Rabbinical Council and Hashivenu Forum next week. So we're going to cover verses 7 through 9 on May the 21st. And there'll be no class on Thursday, May 14th. So I'll see you in 2 weeks, and I'm going to go check the chat board and see if there are any questions. Good night, and I'll see you again in 2 weeks.